Okay, thanks, Ross. Well, thanks everyone for coming along. After what I'm sure is a very busy school day for most of you, to listen to me yak on about teaching business and economics in the new curriculum for Wales. My name is Calvin Jones. I'm a professor of economics at Cardiff Business School, although I'm on strike today, so I'm delivering this very much in a personal capacity. If anybody asks, I'm on strike, not getting paid, but I wanted to do this anyway because it's very important. The reason I'm here is because when the Welsh Government embarked upon the curriculum journey with Professor Donaldson, I was asked to think about what business and economics might look like in the new curriculum, as they hadn't really been hadn't featured really as a core part of the earlier approach to teaching in Wales, in either primary or secondary, really outside of the business GCSE. So I wrote a report back in 2017, I think, outlining what I thought we should be doing under what the curriculum looked like at the time. And since then, I've been involved in a couple of other activities, both working with the Future Generations Commissioner, I think more generally about school education in Wales and whether it's kind of creating learners who are fit for the future, and then also some input into the GCSE and business, which I'm happy to talk about. I've got one slide in it, but I'm more than happy to talk about that kind of process of building the GCSE, new GCSE in business, but this is not the kind of focus of today's presentation. So I've been involved in this for quite a while, and hopefully I'll be able to kind of shed some light on Welsh Government thinking and how we might extract from that ways of teaching business, particularly I think for teachers who haven't really had much experience in this and maybe a little bit concerned. So a couple of apologies before I start. I am an economist, sorry, and this is quite a long and detailed presentation, and there's a reason for that, because there's quite a lot of material in here and there's a lot of link to the original reports, so I wanted to put it all in one place. You can see it, digest it later. You have a copy of the presentation. It's on that bit.ly link there. If you want to scribble that down, you can get access to the presentation at any time then. And hopefully this will be a resource for you over the next few months, rather than just for today, and to kind of forget about. So we know there's not much in terms of guidance in the curriculum around what business studies should look like, but we've got this kind of set of, I guess, principles, areas of interest, things that we'll be expected to cover. And I think we can try and bring into that some key things that we need to worry about as we go forward. The first thing I would say is that that first point about developing and understanding the discipline, its value. I think we need to really instill in learners an understanding what the heck business studies is for. I think what I would say about business, I'll say this probably several times, it provides us with a chance to describe the world that we live in, that learners live in, and then help those learners describe or understand what their place in that world might look like. And I think that's something that not many disciplines can do. You see the green bits, we're expected to think about the Welsh economy, so it has to be bespoke, and where Wales sits within global economic systems. That means it should be bespoke to Wales. I know that there's a temptation sometimes to kind of default to off-the-shelf materials, and particularly thinking in areas like business, where a lot of it's very procedural. But it's clear that the Welsh Government wants this to be something which is really bespoke to Wales, and I think bespoke to different parts of Wales. And I'll talk about that quite a lot. And we have words there on impact, for example. We're not really dissecting a business now. We're not really dissecting an organisation to think how an organisation operates. What we're doing is looking at that organisation in its environment. So yes, profits are important, and understanding what profits are and incentives are important, but also how businesses affect individuals who work within it, individuals who buy from it or sell to it, and then wider communities, and linking back this idea of Cynefin, which goes across the entire curriculum. And then how business does, and in some cases does not, shape the prosperity of communities, and both in the abstract and in terms of how learners are experiencing this in their own communities, of course. And I think You know, we also see in there a link to welfare, you know, which I think links back to things like the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. It links potentially to how we deal with pupil well-being and personal development, of course, which is very important in the new curriculum. So I think there are a number of areas where you know, this new discipline, is newish discipline, if you like, is trying to kind of root itself in the wider curriculum. And the last, you know, thing there, last point there is about, talked about the impact of innovation, technology on both business and environment, the effect of demographic change. So we're trying to describe or help learners succeed in, if you like, a dynamic environment. It's not about taking a snapshot of where we are now and kind of pickling that in aspect and saying that's what it looks like. We have to remember these learners won't be entering the workforce probably until after 2030. So, you know, we did somehow find ways to develop skills, aptitudes, competencies, which are robust to future changes. You know, I think this could probably be the most kind of exciting development in this area for a while, because we have a blank sheet of paper, we've got a clean sheet of paper. We don't have to take forward anything we've done before. Some of you will have taught business before, and some of you will have not. But we don't have to be restricted in what we do. And you know, there are lots of downsides to autonomy, particularly when resources are tight. But there are some upsides as well. So we don't have to think about business equating to maths, which in economics especially we often do. You know, try and work out rates of return, profit margins, try and kind of put everything in that mathematical box. Although clearly we can do that, and you know, if you're a maths teacher, now teaching business as well, as some I know, you might want to begin there. But there's no need to do that. You know, I always say, if Steve Jobs wasn't a mathematician, you know, I mean, being a successful businessman does not equate with being a kind of techie, nerdy maths type, as I am. We don't need complex theory. Quite a lot of stuff in business has been directed towards shutting people out through the development of jargon, the development of really complicated ways of understanding incentives, complicated business structures, complicated accounting structures. That's unnecessary. You know, you don't need a year to explain to people what profit is. You know, it's the amount of money you make and the amount of costs that you incur, minus the amount of costs you incur. So I think, you know, going back to the kind of real brass tacks, understanding people's incentives is important. And we don't meant to think just about for-profit businesses. You know, we can see within the Welsh economy more generally that becoming more important are things like social enterprises and social businesses. Charities have an important role to play, particularly in this cost of living crisis. And we need to think about organisations which provide services in these ways, not just those which are for profit. Also, we've been guilty, I think, my experience in schools, from the time I was in school, in the 1980s, a long time ago, through my kind of younger siblings and now my kids being in school, we tend to teach enterprise and entrepreneurship quite a narrow way, quite an individualistic way. It doesn't have to be. Again, in Wales, community enterprise, community entrepreneurship is really important, particularly in some areas I'm interested in research terms, in terms of community energy source, for example. And what enterprise looks like across Wales is very different. We can represent that as well. And the other thing I would say is that we might not be in a position where we can necessarily teach business separately to other activities, particularly for those of us maybe in primary schools. And we may be in a position where we are building on other activities and bringing a business lens to bear to that particular activity. And I think that's quite exciting. The other thing I think it doesn't need to do is lead into the GCSE. I mean, the GCSE, given that I've been involved in it, and Liza, who's also in the call, has been involved in developing the GCSE, I'd like it to be very popular, but there'll be many students, learners who don't want to go on and do a business GCSE, and we can't ignore them, and we can't start teaching towards the GCSE. That was my son has done in his school, you know, from kind of year 9 onwards. There is an opportunity to do something which flies because it's not assessment oriented, and I think that's quite important. The GCSE, I think, is very good. I would say that because I've been involved in it. I think it's quite exciting as well. I'm more than happy to talk about that, but of course we can't forget that there'll be some pupils who never do a GCSE. People who are teaching in primary school as well, a long way away from that, and you know, I don't want this to be instrumental in terms of how we go about it. I've tried to kind of summarise this into something memorable. So I picked a sheep. I think the old way of doing business in schools and in universities and colleges is to take a business, and if it was a sheep, think about how that sheep worked. You know, what's the internal mechanism look like? What goes in, what goes out? You know, how does it all function? How does it all kind of hand together? And we talk about things like HRM and accounting and strategic developments and some strategic plan making. And that was the kind of way we did business. And I think now, if we think about, you know, new business as a new sheep, you know, we look at that and we think, okay, how does that entity, that business, that sheep live in its environment? You know, how does it interact with this environment? Who owns that sheep? You know, where's it coming from? Where's it going? How does it affect its landscape? How is it affected by it? And I think that kind of contextual approach to understanding businesses is really important and comes through, you know, the notion of Cynefin, which has latterly arrived in the curriculum, is really all about that. And I think what we do in the business arena enables to think about those wider contexts and those wider structures. And of course, in ways, agriculture is an excellent case study for business, so it's not a bad thing either that I chose a sheep. So, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about implementation with, you know, Brady and others. What is this going to look like in schools? And these are some of the questions that I kind of surfaced with Welsh Government and with consortium in the past, and not necessarily get an answer for them. But I'm still wondering what level and shape of guidance would be required for teachers to be able to deliver business effectively and critically, confidently in schools, because a lot of teachers who haven't taught business before are going to be in a position where they're not necessarily confident to do that. So what resources are required, either aggregated across schools, shared between schools? You know, in the last meeting we did this 3 weeks ago, Brady, you know, there's lots of chat in the audience about how they can help each other, to kind of upskill each other, to make sure that business teaching was of quality in all the schools that were there, and that was really encouraging to see. So how do we encourage that transmission of best practice whilst allowing and encouraging local distinctiveness? Because what we have to understand, of course, is that business is not like physics. You know, economics is not like physics. The laws do not apply equally across Wales. You know, if you are studying business in the real world, in the Rhondda, where I'm from, you might do that in the local high street. If you're doing it in Pembrokeshire, you might do it on a beach with a tourist. So if you're studying business in North East Wales, you might do it in Airbus. So, you know, we need to be able to have a set of resources which are appropriate to help us understand what questions we need to be asking at different progression levels, and then allow us, or allow you, mechanisms to make that live in your local communities. And I think that's quite important. I've written a little piece, only a few pages long, which I've linked to there at the bottom, where I'm trying to help, if I can, develop some ideas around what sort of initial concepts we might think about in order to try to, if you like, frame our understandings of how we might teach business in schools. So these are high-level concepts, and they are malleable. You could, you know, you might hate them all and throw them all out. You might think one or two of them might suit you in terms of hanging your learning around, especially if that learning is maybe tacked onto other subjects in ways which mean you need to find a kind of thread that goes through different, you know, throughout a year or for longer progression. And these are some kind of conceptual ideas that might help, might not, you know, and they go from the idea of business being really a story of stuff. If any of you haven't seen The Story of Stuff, which is an excellent YouTube video, I recommend it to you. Sort of the linear economy and how, you know, we take pristine resources, put them through businesses, create waste, which is really fascinating. But businesses are kind of a story about collecting stuff together with people's ideas and labour and creating products. And we can think about how those resources sit within Wales, how they're used within Wales, how they're used globally, where we get our resources from, the food that we eat, the energy that we consume, for example, and think about how businesses enable those processes. The second one, I've got reasons, you know, which is all about incentives, why do people get involved in enterprises and organisations, both for monetary reasons. But if you look at the vast majority of small businesses in Wales, for example, will have those decisions made for them in many ways. Those owners, you know, who farmers, for example, who will enter farming because their fathers, particularly fathers, were farmers, you know, and at a very different position than from somebody who chooses to get involved in a particular area because they know it's likely to make the money or like kudos. So you can think about these different ways in which people get involved in businesses, and then wonder what choices are open to our learners, and maybe use this as a way to talk to them about their choices and how they can make those choices within the kind of choice set they have in their local economy, or further afield. I think there's really important things that we can link to in terms of the science curriculum as well, you know, the kind of hard science curriculum, about enterprise, innovation, science, developments. You know, so how is it that businesses organise and innovate to make the world better? And is that an easy and straightforward process? Are there issues around how that innovation is effective, and for maybe well-off people compared to poor people, or people in the global south compared to the global north? How then do businesses organise internally themselves to use talent and enable them to both make profits and make a difference? And then other concepts there, structures and strategies, which made more traditional focus, and then this idea of interactions. You know, so how do businesses actually engage with other organisations, other businesses, governments, customers? You know, I kind of I think there's huge amounts that we can do in terms of this kind of interactivity of business with other actors to explain to kids what they're all about. And I think, you know, there are also huge opportunities to take the curriculum's cross-cutting themes and apply a business lens to them, or to explain business in terms of the link back to the four cross-cutting themes that we have given to us in our curriculum, kind of overarching concepts. I think this is, you know, the only problem here in a way is too much choice. There are so many ways that we can link business and economics teaching back through to these four areas, that I think, you know, the only problem that we have is where we begin and where we end, really, because there's so much we can do there. And again, in that report, you'll have access to, I've just, you know, again, this is kind of top of my head. These are my ideas about how we can think about maybe a kind of matrix, an XY matrix, looking at where we can link together different kind of concepts around business, why business is what it does, with our four core kind of conceptual framings for the new curriculum. So I'll leave that for you to have a look at if you wish, going forward. And, you know, if I was to give just one or two examples of this, this is a mock-up of some adverts for a series called Mad Men, which if you haven't seen it, I can heartily recommend. It's one of the best dramas in the last couple of decades, I think, which was an advertising agency in Madison Avenue back in the 60s and 70s. And, you know, it strikes me when you think about business and you think about the cross-cutting themes, you know, who is writing in the most punchy, persuasive, brief, straightforward, impactful way? That's businesses and advertising, you know, and not only is that writing really punchy and informative and effective, but it's also loaded, you know. So not only are we maybe talking to learners about the quality of the writing in maybe some advertisements, for example, we might also be talking about the intent of writing. You know, when we write for purposes. We write to persuade audiences. We write to justify our own positions. You know, we sometimes write to get marks in an exam, heaven forbid. And I think, you know, so we can try and find through business environments ways in which we can take forward some of these core curriculum ideas, which is cross-curriculum literacy theme, in ways which will be real and not necessarily, you know, kind of abstract to students. All that said, I'm not discounting the difficulty of doing this in the context that we have, even before the potential next round of austerity, which might be facing us after the Chancellor's autumn statement. This graph on the left is spending per pupil in 2018-19 prices, going back to 2005-06. A graph created by a colleague, Luke Sibieta, who's done some excellent work on school funding, and you can see that we're in trouble. You know, that the I mean, it's slightly out of date now, so for what I wrote in 2019, but expecting to deliver the new curriculum in an incredibly resource-constrained environment, I think is hugely problematic, and especially where you've got, to some schools, brand new areas of teaching, like business, then that makes it even more problematic. And I'm not unaware of that. And you know, I tackled some of these issues in my report, which is there, which I did with Sophie Howes, just about finish, as a Future Generations Commissioner, and that there's a link there if you'd have a look at it. So we know that business teaching will be contingent. It'll be limited by the time and resource we've got. It'll be limited by the expertise of the practitioners, by the teachers who maybe won't have done it before. And so I think, you know, to expect a bright, shiny, fantastic thing to emerge wonderfully into the new curriculum and be just immediately fit for purpose and excellent, I think is stretching it. Unfortunately, you know, within that report on the right-hand side, I did suggest to Welsh Government that they should inaugurate the 1% tax on income, council tax and businesses as an education levy, and spend all that money, be £200 million plus a year on school education. But unfortunately, the First Minister, for some reason, didn't think that was a good idea. So we are where we are. But I think, you know, that whatever we do, we have to recognise that it's done, you know, in a difficult environment. I've just posted here some stuff from my 2017 paper, and I posted a link to that paper as well. Because what I said in that paper, which unfortunately didn't come to pass, is that given the newness of some of this material, the Welsh Government needed to take an enabling central role and to somehow create a central resource which would at least help teachers at various levels of progression, you know, from first primary right up to school leaving age, would at least give some sort of framework where teachers were confident that they were asking the right questions in the right ways, and that we had some measure of coherence, you know, between different teachers who might be teaching in the same school, between different teachers who might, you know, leave a school and new one arrive, and across space as well. I mean, that hasn't happened. There's no central resource. I still think that's a huge miss, which I will, you know, be trying to push forward on over the next few months. But this again is just some of my ideas on what the sort of things that we might be looking to incorporate in some of our business teaching. Now, some of this is fairly advanced, and this was intended to be as inclusive as it could be. You know, so this is by no means a kind of any sort of outline content that you might want to do, certainly not in earlier years. But these are the things I thought, again, it's 2017, slightly old now. These are the sort of things that I thought were important, and we were going to really drive the environment within which business will succeed or otherwise, and that has to be represented in what we teach students. You know, I wrote about this before the climate emergency was declared in 2019, and I would think that in the environmental context we find ourselves in, the technological context, which, you know, is accelerating all the time with Just Eat and Airbnb and all these ways of doing business via the cloud, for example. You know, the whole idea of the fact, for example, wages haven't increased in Britain in real terms really since the 1970s. You know, we're more or less where we were in 1971 in terms of real wages, whereas profits have increased markedly since 1971 as a share of national income. So I think there's lots of ways we can make this real for the kids, for the learners. And that's, again, there's a huge list of stuff there that you might want to just look through and think, okay, is any of this kind of stuff I can get a handle on with, given my own expertise and my own interests, and, you know, and be that start of a journey. And I say, albeit not one where I expect all of these things to be undertaken. And, you know, in practical terms, I think, as I said, I think there obviously will be some schools, some of the new large integrated schools, some secondary schools who will already have a really strong business offer, who already do it very well, who've got expert practitioners, and who will, I suspect, you know, jump at the chance to teach business in a more integrated fashion and a more kind of expansive fashion, including you know, more the context that we see around us every day, more the kind of high street stuff we maybe haven't had a chance to before. But for others, I think it's going to be a case of integrating business teaching, things we're already doing. You know, I guess one example here, which is this, because for Gwent schools should really be the Chartists, not Dick Penderyn. But Dick Penderyn, you know, was hung as a result of the uprising in Merthyr, you know, and if you tell that story as a history teacher, which of course you will have the chance to do now in the new curriculum, we won't necessarily be all Tudors and, you know, and English kings and queens. We can do effectively what we want in history now and the new curriculum, more or less. If you're teaching Dick Penderyn or the Chartists, you know, to me, that's inherently a business and economics subject. It's about the share of returns to labour and capital from those the mines back in the 19th century and earlier, in the ironworks in the 18th century. It's a story of incoming owners versus local people, local wages and immigration. It's a story of poor health and safety at work, very poor health and safety at work, and the fragmentation and precariousness of working life. And all of those things are still with us in Wales. All of those subjects are absolutely live in the Welsh economy today. So it's not a big jump from discussing events of 200 years ago to just sit with learners and say, okay, what does that tell us about where we are now? You know, what sorts of things can we see in the Welsh economy of 1800 and 1900 that still resonate today on our local high streets and our local factories and in what your family does, day to day. And so I think that there'll be a case in some ways of business adding richness to existing things in the humanities area, at least, certainly, but more widely as well. And I think that's a way that many schools will go. And again, I think when we look around us, in Wales, for example, almost all geography is economic geography. When we look at what's on our hillsides, in terms of the wind turbines, above my house, Pen y Cymoedd, at the top of the Rhondda and Leaf Valleys and Cynon Valleys, owned by a Swedish company, Vattenfall, which is part owned by Swedish taxpayers. If we look at the rest of that landscape there in the bottom left, those trees which are owned by the public sector. I'm actually a member of the Board of Natural Resources Wales. We're trying to work out what should be on our hillsides that deliver prosperity alongside climate resilience, climate mitigation, and so on, biodiversity, all really interesting questions in terms of the resources of the Welsh landscape. And then to our beaches and our hillsides and the tourism, second home ownership and so on, which is shaping intimately some of these communities, maybe not quite so much in south east and south central Wales. But this geography, these are all geographic questions. And they're all economic geographic questions. So I think the opportunity to build what we can from what we're doing is there, if we can only find the time to do it. And again, coming back to the kind of environmental issue, if we are doing, if we're going out doing a litter pick with our primary learners, if we're going out for forest schools, we're looking around, we're thinking about resources in the landscapes, we're looking at litter and saying, okay, there's a piece of litter, we're picking it up. What name, what's the branding on that piece of litter? Why is it end up here, not in a bin or being recycled? Whose responsibility is that? Whose job is that to make sure it doesn't happen? These questions then leads back to the circular economy, issues around waste, issues around climate change, maybe, which I think we can not tack onto, but integrate with the stuff that we're already doing with our learners at various levels of progression as well. And the we have to remember that this is all absolutely happening around us and happening in learners' homes. The reality of the economy is biting. As I'm sitting here, people are unable to eat and heat their homes, kids going hungry, and there's a chance to connect learners' lives with the business environment and the economic environment in a way which is very, very difficult in other subjects. It's possible to make a child think about the physics of their BMX jump or whatever is it's probably not BMX anymore, is it? It's not 1984 anymore, like when I was a kid. But it's possible to do that, of course, to connect those things. But it's much more possible to say, look, this is how business works. And one of the teachers asked me at the last time we did this in person, what's the first thing you would do if you were an inexperienced teacher teaching business? And I'd say, send the learners home and ask them to come back with their top 10 things they spend money on in their households and have a chat about it. So where's that money going? Are these Welsh companies? What sort of services are being purchased? Are they luxuries? Are they necessities? What's the difference between those two things? Who decides? How do you decide where the money goes? And that kind of unearthing conversation, obviously done discreetly and with nuance, I think is a really nice way of just helping students understand that this is about them, that they will be affected, but they will live within the business environment, whether they study it or not. And the more they understand it, the more chance they have of making sense of it and making sense of their wider lives. But of course, clearly there's a job work to do. for people without much experience in teaching business, to make sure the resources are there to help them do it. I'm quite impressed with the stuff I see in Hub. You know, I mean, some of the stuff there. My daughter loves Minecraft education. She's going on for 11. She thinks it's great. There's not currently anything in Minecraft education on business that I can see on Hub. I think there's huge opportunity there because Minecraft is about resources. It's about having resources, about building things. I think it's not rocket science to build something around understanding how business works within that environment. My preference would be that there would be much more resource, much more available to teachers to be able to initially take off the shelf and adapt and then adopt in their own teaching, in their own context. We're not there yet, but I think we need some work to do, and I think it's perfectly feasible to use Hub for that. The other thing I think struck me when I was putting this presentation together is that as somebody who works at university, I'm quite lucky in that I'm really well networked, because I've got an interest in Welsh stuff, into organisations which do loads of work studying Welsh business and the Welsh economy. So whether that's people like Institute of Welsh Affairs, Welsh Centre for Public Policy, which are the two I've linked here, you know, the Federation of Small Business, CBI, who are a bit less active in Wales maybe, but all these organisations have lots and lots of resources, which I kind of come to realise teachers often aren't aware of, or aren't kind of familiar and comfortable with. The same would certainly be true of things like Office for National Resources, Office for National Statistics resources around statistics on local economy. So you can, for example, for the smallest, you know, census super output areas, certainly wards and local authorities, get really good data on what sorts of industries people are employed in, and use those data for jumping off point for discussion, and look at those data over time very easily from the Nomis Web website. So, you know, I'm also aware there's a job work to do, make sure that teachers are aware of these wider resources, which maybe, you know, I and others are more easily aware of, to make sure that things are easy and that you don't spend time, you know, and effort scrabbling around for things which are fairly easily available. I mean, to summarise then, you know, I don't think there's any doubt that teaching business in the curriculum is quite challenging, and particularly for those who haven't done business before, if you like. And for those who have taught business before, you know, this is a big change. This is quite an extensive kind of landscape compared to what we've done in the past, and the truth of university as well. The university has spent a lot of time teaching kids about how the internals of business work, and much less about the business environment, maybe. But I think business provides, and economics provides almost unique opportunity to show learners what I call the system of the world, and then let them understand where they sit in that system. And because business is different and economics is different across every part of Wales, it's more challenging. It has to be more bespoke to resonate with learners, but also, of course, potentially much more real and much more valuable to those learners. And I think if we can just get past some of the key resource issues, then the chances are that we can make this something really exciting and innovative, not just kind of across British education, but I think this will be among some of the best business education in Europe if we could do it right. So I'll stop sharing now. Thanks very much for listening, and I'm happy if we've got any questions or, you know, anything to say.
Thank you, Kelvin. Does anybody have any questions for Kelvin? Maybe any sort of projects you're teaching in school that he might be able to give you some ideas on how you can incorporate a little business into it?
Hi, my concern, I teach business at GCSE and A level, and I've switched departments recently. I used to be part of the maths department, and now I'm within the humanities department. And I can't really say that I've been welcomed with open arms. You know, they kind of, the humanities department are fighting amongst themselves for resources. So geography, history, RE, they all feel like they're being squeezed, and they're all fighting to put their corner in. So the fact that there's another subject area now trying to get into the limited time at Key Stage 3 is a concern from all of them, because they're all thinking that I'm taking curriculum time off them. So I'm just wondering about the possibilities or the chances of bringing all this new stuff in and where it's going to fit time-wise, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair point. but of course, them's the rules. You know, being a teacher teaching humanities does not the fact that the new curriculum requires you to teach business. So I understand that position. I think, you know, what I would say is that I think there's an opportunity to both teach business in a standalone fashion in larger school contexts, but also to build on and complement work that's being done in other humanities subjects. I mean, certainly if anybody's teaching Welsh history, they will be an opportunity to bring a business lens to that, which will massively enrich those learners' experience, their engagement with the subject, and their understanding of why it's important. You know, so if one of your colleagues is teaching Industrial Revolution, they are effectively teaching business, or they will be. If they think they're going to continue to teach the history my daughter's getting in primary school, my son got in secondary, then they're going to be very much surprised. So they're going to have to change, and they are better changing in ways where you can complement them, so that what you're teaching and what they're teaching actually resonates and complements each other and leads to a better experience for everyone. That and makes everyone's life easier rather than harder.
Yeah, we have. We've worked on some projects together. We've gone sort of on a like a thematic approach. So I've contributed some elements to things that they're doing. So we've looked at things like the role of women in the labour market and stuff like that. And we've also done things with, say, like the Industrial Revolution and things there as well. But it's you know, your vision seems to be quite exciting, really, and there's lots and lots of opportunities there, whereas I don't know about putting forward the full range of that. I think it's going to be quite small, or unless it's just how you see it being small at the start and then growing bigger as it gets more embedded.
So I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's I mean, I tried to say in the presentation that I you know, in fact, I mean, I've been doing stuff with schools now, say for the last 6-7 years. You know, and it's quite shocking the level of resources that aren't available and the level of time that's not available. And I think it's going to be contingent, and you're going to have to find areas where you can like insert yourself in ways which are helpful for everybody. But of course, that the end game would be that students can take have a business head and a business approach to everything they do. I mean, RE maybe a bit less, so I don't know, although Jesus did say a lot about business, and a few other religions do as well. But I think it's going to be a case of starting small and understanding where there are opportunities. And I think that's absolutely fine, because if the Welsh Government wanted this to be a big, shiny, marvellous thing, they should have put money into it. And this is my frank assessment. And because the Welsh Government didn't really put much money into it, they'll get what they get. And I don't think anybody should be at all worried or ashamed or embarrassed about the fact that they have to do what they can do with this, you know, the school time they've got and their colleagues' ears, and you do it best you can. And I think, you know, my feeling is that this is so important, particularly in the cost of living crisis, particularly in source places that many of us work. It will prove itself quite quickly that being able to, for example, link maths development with household finance, the fact that doesn't happen in many schools, from what I experience, astonishes me. And using, you know, the business kind of discipline is one way of doing that, isn't it? So one way of saying, well, here's your mathematics, and here's what we want to teach you business. Where does that all happen? Part of it happens in household budgets. We spend money in businesses. Here's a way of improving kids' maths by doing something which they can recognise the benefit of, and their own personal financial competence improves as a result of it. So I think, you know, that's it's going to be tough, but we just got to be nuanced, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you.
I think you muted there, Riley.
Sorry, I think Leah has a question.
Hello. So I'm a business studies teacher of 19 years, and I understand everything you say and the changes need to happen with the GCSE course. Have you thought about, maybe, I understand it's about the children, it's about them having a better understanding of the social environment, the impact the business is having on their environment, and them being able to connect more. What about, like, you know, having a topic like event management, something that the pupils would probably find quite interesting, and it can, you know, we can build in lots of different elements into it. Does that come into any of it?
Well, I'm glad you asked me because I've got a PhD in events, funnily enough. Yeah, I did my PhD in sports events a long time ago. So I think I would absolutely expect that teachers will pick things they are comfortable with in order to act as a jumping off point for these wider discussions. And the event management one is almost in fact, I've just had a paper rejected from a journal because there was too much event and tourism stuff in it for what I was trying to say. Because I think it's a really indicative thing. So when we put a lot of resources and effort and visibility in something like the World Cup or a cultural festival, then a lot of these issues get surfaced around whose voice gets listened to, who the sponsors are, how marketing is done, and particularly what happens to the environment before, during, and after the event. I mean, my PhD is in the kind of economic impacts of sports and cultural events. So all of those things are absolutely right in the space of what context is this happening in, and particularly when you can see events happening very differently in global south context and in Cardiff. You know, taking kids around the stadium, and I've done a lot of stuff at the Millennium Stadium, sorry, Principality Stadium, and it's just a really nice, it's a really teachable thing, you know, because it sits in the middle of Cardiff, it shapes Cardiff. It wouldn't succeed anywhere other than in the middle of town for lots of reasons. So I think there will be probably dozens of other examples where teachers have a particular interest and they're right, okay, maybe I've taught this in a quite procedural way, you know. So I think what's difficult to do in the new curriculum, I think, will be trying to train kids to become an event manager. Because, you know, so I obviously, most of my pupils, grown-up pupils, are just about to enter the labour market, and we send them out after getting a degree or a master's, and then we talk to employers all the time, and the employers tell us, your students who've just graduated with an economics degree or business management degree are not fit for purpose. We've got to retrain them because they don't know what they're talking about. So if we can't do it and we're 1 year away from them being in the labour market, schools have much less of a chance when they are 4 years away or 8 years away or 16 years away, whatever it is. So I think it's about what skills, competencies, aptitudes can we encourage and expose our learners to, which may have a hook which stays there into the longer term, if that makes sense. But yeah, I mean, I absolutely see that the themes will be different, and you know, the event management theme is one that's close to my heart anyway.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Calvin. Does anybody else have a question? There, you had your hand up at one point, or was it just an accident? Or yeah, do you have a question?
It was more of a comment and observation, really. First of all, thank you. I'm actually a primary school practitioner, so it's a very different lens that we look at through. But I think what would be really, well, what's been really interesting for me is primary school practitioners really aren't practiced at considering business studies as part of the curriculum. However, we are quite good at overlapping and looking at an area whereby you can go across humanities, and there's no, we don't have the issue sort of, you know, it's not my area, or I'm history or anything like that. So I think from my viewpoint, we need to do a piece of upskilling and professional learning for staff to be able to just think through that business studies lens that you've been talking about. So I just wanted to say thank you very much. It was very useful, and obviously very different needs from our stage of children comparative to the older children. So thank you.
Well, thanks very much. And you know, my email is available if you want to drop me a line with anything on any kind of further chat. And obviously read the reports I've written, and you know, anything you want to follow up on, just give me a shout, Claire.
Thank you. I might just do that.
You'd serve.
Thanks.
I think Lisa has a question as well.
Yeah, hi Cal. Obviously I know how much work and effort you put into the the consultation, the qualifications Wales, and I know you know how important all of this agenda is, as it is to me. And your suggestion of the story of stuff is something that we've started to try and employ down in Pembrokeshire, actually, through some of the courses that we do at primary and educator level. And I have to say, it really works. You're you know, bringing the idea of bringing even 5 things that that you spend money on in an average household is something that I'd love to bring into what we do. We typically get the kids to bring in something that they wear, something that they love using. You know, it might be an iPhone or whatever, or the brother's or the sister's iPhone, and one other thing, and it usually is an edible thing. And unpacking the story of stuff actually is a fantastic way, at primary level at least, to effectively understand how businesses work without having to go into the structure and the history of business as the way you do in the secondary school. But I have a second question, which is around just been on the WeJEC website for my sins, and looking at how they are starting to develop the qualifications around the skill certificate. So aside from the sustainable business GCSE, and I just wondered where the tendency or the overlaps might be between schools looking at both options and going, well, actually, the new revamped Welsh BACS certificate might be the thing to go for over a business GCSE. Is that likely to be an issue, or is it a separate qualification that doesn't you know, have relevance in this sense?
That's a really good question. I mean, I don't, well, certainly in this, I mean, there's others on the call know better than me, but I don't know many schools that teach Welsh BAC at, you know, my son's doing it alongside A level, and most people do alongside A level, certainly around here, I think. And I don't know what the revamp, I haven't looked at the Welsh BAC, so I don't know what it looks like really. So that's something I can't answer. Maybe somebody else has got a view on it. I don't know. In the school system.
The new advanced is going to be assessing the integral skills of, you know, problem solving, creativity, personal effectiveness. So yeah, all those skills are relevant in business, but I suppose they're integral skills that will be taught across all areas of learning. So I don't personally think that it would overtake a business qualification. I think it would probably enhance any other qualification personally. But I suppose those are just my personal thoughts.
Thanks.
Does anybody else have any questions?